It was August 23, 1963, in a small working-class bar called McCarthy's Tavern in Long Beach, California. Steve McQueen had just finished the final pickup shots for The Great Escape and was still wearing his Army Air Corps captain's uniform from the film. Exhausted from a long day of filming, Steve stopped at McCarthy's, a neighborhood bar near the Long Beach port where dock workers, merchant marines, and WWII veterans gathered after work. Steve wanted a quiet beer before driving home. What he didn't anticipate was that walking into a working-class bar full of real veterans while wearing a military uniform would create one of the most emotional moments of his life. 30 seconds after Steve ordered his beer, an 82-year-old man named Thomas Gunner Walsh stood up with visible difficulty, pointed at Steve, and said in a voice that carried across the entire bar, "You don't deserve to wear that uniform, boy. Take it off before I rip it off you myself." The bar went completely silent. Every man there turned to watch. Walsh was a legend in Long Beach, a D-Day survivor who'd fought through France and Germany, who'd earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. When Walsh spoke, people listened, and Walsh thought Steve McQueen was stolen valor, a young man pretending to be military for attention. This is not a story about movies or Hollywood or even about misunderstanding. This is about respect, humility, and the moment when a movie star proved he understood the difference between playing a hero and actually being one. In 1963, Long Beach, California was a working-class port city. The bars near the docks weren't glamorous Hollywood establishments. They were neighborhood places where working men gathered, where veterans met to remember fallen brothers, where community bonds were formed over cheap beer and honest conversation. McCarthy's Tavern had been operating since 1946, opened by a Navy veteran who wanted to create a space where servicemen felt welcome. The walls were covered with photographs of neighborhood men who'd served, some who'd never come home. The clientele was authentic working-class America, dock workers, loading ships, merchant marines between voyages, factory workers from the aerospace plants, and WWII veterans now in their 60s and 70s who gathered to preserve their brotherhood. Steve McQueen had grown up in this kind of environment. His childhood had been rough, marked by poverty and instability. He'd done hard labor, had worked alongside men who drank in bars like McCarthy's, understood their values and their pride. Even after becoming a movie star, Steve was more comfortable in working-class spaces than Hollywood parties. That's why he'd stopped at McCarthy's instead of some trendy Sunset Strip establishment. He wanted to be around real people, not industry phonies. But walking in, wearing a military uniform, even a costume from a film, was a mistake he'd realized too late. Thomas Gunner Walsh had been sitting at his regular corner table when Steve walked in. Walsh was a fixture at McCarthy's, there almost every evening, nursing a beer while talking with other veterans about old times. At 82, Walsh had survived more than most men experience in 3 lifetimes. He'd been a young soldier at Normandy on D-Day, had fought through the hedgerows of France, had survived the Battle of the Bulge in the freezing Ardennes winter. He'd been wounded twice, had seen friends die, had carried those memories for nearly 20 years. After the war, Walsh had worked the docks, raised a family, and became a respected elder in the Long Beach veteran community. He had zero tolerance for disrespect toward military service. When Walsh saw a young man in an Army Air Corps uniform walk into McCarthy's, his initial reaction was confusion. The uniform looked authentic, but something was off. The man was too young to be a WWII veteran. He'd have been a child during the war, and he was wearing captain's bars, but carried himself wrong, too casual, too Hollywood. As Steve ordered his beer at the bar counter, Walsh's confusion turned to anger. This young man was wearing a military uniform he hadn't earned, displaying rank he hadn't achieved, walking into a veteran's bar like he belonged there. To Walsh, this was stolen valor, the most insulting form of disrespect. Walsh stood up slowly, his old wounds and decades of hard labor making movement difficult. He grabbed his cane, carried not for show but because shrapnel in his hip from 1945 had never fully healed, and walked towards Steve with purpose. The men at Walsh's table tried to stop him. "Gunner, wait, that might be." But Walsh was already moving, his anger overriding caution. Steve was taking his first sip of beer when he heard Walsh's voice behind him, loud enough to silence the entire bar. "You don't deserve to wear that uniform, boy. Take it off before I rip it off you myself." Steve turned around slowly, beer still in hand, and saw an elderly man standing 3 feet away, pointing at him with a trembling finger. The man's face showed decades of hard living. His eyes carried pain and pride in equal measure, and his stance, despite age and injury, was military straight. Steve immediately understood what was happening. This wasn't random aggression. This was a veteran protecting something sacred. "Sir," Steve began carefully, but Walsh cut him off. "Don't sir me, boy. I earned my rank. You're wearing captain's bars you got from a costume shop. That uniform represents men who died. Men better than you'll ever be. You're risking their memory by pretending to be something you're not." The entire bar was watching now. 30 men, most of them veterans or working men who respected veterans, all waiting to see how this young guy in the fake uniform would respond. Some recognized Steve as the actor from The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, but most just saw a young man being confronted by a war hero. Steve set his beer down slowly and faced Walsh directly. "You're absolutely right," Steve said quietly. Walsh blinked, clearly expecting argument or excuses, not immediate agreement. "This uniform isn't real military. It's a costume from a movie I just finished filming. I'm an actor, not a soldier. I never served. I never earned these bars or this uniform. You're absolutely right that I don't deserve to wear it." The bar remained silent, but the quality of the silence changed. Men who'd expected confrontation were now listening with curiosity. "My name is Steve McQueen. I'm an actor. We just finished filming The Great Escape, a movie about POWs in World War II. I played an American officer. This uniform is authentic to the period, made from real military specifications, but it's still just a costume. I wore it today for final pickup shots, and I'm still wearing it because I was tired and just wanted a beer before going home. I should have changed first. I apologize for any disrespect." Walsh's anger hadn't diminished. "You make money pretending to be soldiers, while real soldiers are still dealing with what we went through." "Yes, sir," Steve said. "I do, and you're right to be angry about that. Most Hollywood movies about war are garbage. They glorify violence. They make war look exciting. They turn real suffering into entertainment. I've hated that about Hollywood since I started acting." Steve's voice was getting emotional now, but The Great Escape is different, or at least I tried to make it different. It's based on a true story about real POWs who suffered in German camps, real men who risked everything to escape, real men who died trying. We spent a year making that film as authentic as we could, because we wanted to honor those men, not exploit them. Walsh's expression was shifting slightly, anger mixing with something else. "You think making a movie honors real soldiers?" "No," Steve said immediately. "No movie can truly honor what you went through. Nothing Hollywood creates can match the reality of what you survived. But we tried to tell a true story respectfully, to show that POWs weren't just suffering. They were fighting back with courage and ingenuity, to remind people that real men did incredible things during that war." Steve paused, his voice breaking slightly. "My stepfather was a merchant marine. He didn't talk much about the war, but I saw what it did to him. The nightmares, the drinking, the inability to settle back into normal life. I saw how the war followed him every day for 20 years after it ended." Steve's eyes were getting moist now. "I never served. I was too young for World War II. Missed career through luck and timing. I'll never understand what you went through. I'll never deserve to wear this uniform for real. But when I put it on for that film, I tried to remember men like you, men who actually wore it, men who actually fought, men who actually died. I tried to honor that instead of just pretending for the camera. Walsh was still standing, still holding his cane, but the anger in his face was fading. You're still making money off our suffering. Yes, sir, I am, Steve admitted. And I don't know how to justify that except to say that if we don't tell these stories, they'll be forgotten. The men who died in those POW camps, the men who fought to escape, the men who sacrificed everything. If we don't tell their stories, who? A voice came from Walsh's table. Another elderly veteran stood up. Gunner, he's talking about the Great Escape. That's the Roger Bushell story. The Stalag Luft III escape. 50 men executed after they were recaptured. Walsh turned to look at his friend. You know about this? Read about it in 48. British mostly, but Americans involved too. Real POWs, real escape, real executions. Gestapo shot them in cold blood even after they'd been captured. It's a true story, Gunner. If he's telling that story, he's telling about real heroes. Walsh turned back to Steve. That's what your movie is about? Those 50 men? Yes, sir, Steve said. We show their escape attempt, their capture, and their execution. We don't glorify it. We don't make it look fun. We show it as tragedy, as sacrifice, as courage that cost lives. Walsh's cane lowered slightly. He was quiet for a long moment, evaluating. Then he said something that broke the tension in the entire bar. That uniform you're wearing, it's authentic? Yes, sir. We hired military advisors to ensure accuracy. Everything down to the buttons is period correct. Take off your cap, Walsh said. Steve removed his officer's cap, holding it carefully. Walsh examined it, his weathered hands tracing the insignia. This is accurate. Army Air Corps, early war issue. Someone did their research. We tried to get everything right, Steve said. We felt we owed that to the real men. Walsh handed the cap back. Sit down, son. Both of us. I'm too old to stand this long, and this conversation deserves to be finished properly. Steve and Walsh sat at the bar. The bartender, reading the situation, brought them fresh beers without being asked. Walsh took a long drink, then looked at Steve. I've seen a lot of war movies. Most of them make me sick. John Wayne shooting hundreds of Japanese without breaking a sweat. Soldiers dying prettily with music swelling. Courage without cost. It's all lies. I know, Steve said quietly. But do you actually know? Walsh asked. Do you understand why those lies hurt? It's because they make people think war is glorious. They make young men want to enlist thinking they'll be heroes. They make people who didn't serve feel like they missed some grand adventure. The truth is, war destroys you. Even when you survive, you're destroyed. The nightmares never stop. The friends you lost never come back. The things you had to do never leave you. Walsh's voice was shaking now, emotion breaking through decades of control. I killed men, son, not in the clean, heroic way movies show. I killed them up close. Messy, brutal. I watched friends die in my arms. I survived when better men didn't. I came home and couldn't explain to anyone what it was really like. Because civilians don't want to hear the truth. They want the movie version. Steve was crying now, not hiding it, letting tears run down his face. I can't understand that, sir. I can only try to respect it. Then tell me, Walsh said, does your movie show the truth? Or the comfortable lie? Steve thought carefully before answering. We show men dying. We show the fear. We show that escape wasn't adventure. It was desperation. We show that 50 men were executed in cold blood for trying to be free. We don't make it glorious. We make it honest. Walsh was quiet for another long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He stood, still difficult, still painful, and extended his hand to Steve. I believe you tried to honor them. That's all any of us can ask." Steve stood and shook Walsh's hand, both men's grips firm, despite their emotions. "Thank you for challenging me, sir. You had every right. I should have changed before coming here." "No," Walsh said. "You should have explained who you were immediately, but you did that once I challenged you. You didn't get defensive. You didn't hide behind being a movie star. You admitted your limitations and showed respect. That matters." Walsh addressed the entire bar, his voice carrying authority. "This is Steve McQueen. He's an actor working on a film about the Stalag Luft third escape. The real story, not Hollywood lies. He's trying to honor the men who died there. I believe his intentions are good. If any of you served, if you have stories about POWs, about those camps, about what those men endured, he should hear them, not for entertainment, for accuracy. So when people watch his movie, they'll be seeing something closer to truth than the usual Hollywood garbage." The transformation in the bar was remarkable. Men who'd been ready to throw Steve out minutes earlier now approached to shake his hand, to share their stories, to talk about friends who'd been POWs, about the reality of camps and capture and survival. Steve listened to every story with genuine attention, asking questions, taking mental notes, showing respect that went beyond professional courtesy. One elderly Marine told Steve about being captured at Bataan, about the Death March, about 3 years in Japanese camps where men died from disease and starvation. Steve listened with tears in his eyes, thanking the man for sharing something so painful. A Navy veteran told Steve about friends in German POW camps who'd been part of escape attempts, who'd suffered brutal reprisals. Steve absorbed every detail, every painful memory, treating these stories as sacred trust. Hours passed. Steve stayed long after he'd intended, listening to veterans share memories they rarely discussed, honoring their experiences by simply bearing witness. Walsh sat with Steve the entire time, occasionally adding his own stories, ensuring the younger men were respectful, creating space for healing through shared remembrance. When Steve finally left McCarthy's tavern after midnight, he was still wearing the Army Air Corps uniform, but now it carried different weight. Walsh walked him to the door despite the late hour. "Come back sometime," Walsh said. "Not as Captain Hilts, as Steve. We could use someone who actually listens." "I will," Steve promised. "Thank you for teaching me something important tonight." "What's that?" "That wearing the uniform, even as an actor, is a responsibility I hadn't fully understood. You reminded me these aren't just costumes. They represent real men, real sacrifice. I'll carry that with me in every military role I ever play." The Great Escape was released in July. Veterans organizations across the country praised its authenticity and respect for the true story. Many veterans wrote letters, specifically mentioning that the film felt honest, that it showed sacrifice without glorifying violence, that it honored real POWs without exploiting their suffering. Steve McQueen received dozens of letters from veterans, thanking him for telling the story respectfully. He kept every letter, answering many personally, never forgetting the lesson Thomas Walsh taught him in McCarthy's tavern. Walsh and Steve remained friends until Walsh's death. Steve would visit Walsh regularly when filming in Southern California, always bringing beer, always listening to stories, always treating the elderly veteran with deep respect. When Walsh died, Steve attended the funeral in his regular civilian clothes, standing in the back, letting Walsh's military family take their proper place of honor. Steve was one of 8 men who carried Walsh's flag-draped casket to its burial site in the Veterans section of Long Beach Cemetery. The story of that confrontation in McCarthy's tavern spread through veteran communities, not as a story of conflict, but as an example of how respect can bridge the gap between Hollywood and real heroes. Veterans would tell younger generations, Steve McQueen understood. He listened. He admitted he couldn't truly understand. That's the respect we deserve. Today, The Great Escape is still played at veteran gatherings, still shown at military bases, still respected for its authenticity. The film endures not just as entertainment, but as a respectful telling of a true story. And veterans who know the full history know that Steve McQueen's respect for real soldiers began in a working-class bar in Long Beach, when an elderly hero challenged him to prove his intentions were honorable, and Steve responded with humility, honesty. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who served, someone who remembers the greatest generation, and someone who understands that the greatest respect comes from listening to real heroes instead of pretending to be them. Have you ever witnessed genuine respect between Hollywood and veterans? Share your memory in the comments.